Hello everyone. I am the developer of the American Civil War mod revived for Mount and Blade Warband. And for this channel's debut, we are going to provide a lesson on infantry tactics during the American Civil War. In our modern age, it is only natural that the old ways of war have become forgotten, and therefore many players of the mod who are unfamiliar with the time period and this style of combat struggle to succeed in-game. Therefore, part of the purpose of this channel is to provide players with practical video lessons, including in-game demonstrations, in order to help shape them into effective leaders that can reliably produce success on the battlefield. We will first go over some of the fundamentals that you will need to understand in order to begin your studies in the School of the Soldier. For this, I will be referencing a video uploaded by the channel, Mark Grimsley, who also uses a video from the American Battlefield Trust in his presentation. We will not watch the full video, as not all of the information is relevant to our purpose here, but I will provide a link in the description to both his video, as well as the video from the American Battlefield Trust for those who are interested in learning more.
Now, in terms of how a Civil War regiment fought, this is a regiment in typical battle formation. Every regiment consisted of 10 companies, and at the beginning of the Civil War, when these regiments were at full strength, the regiment would consist of about 1,000 men, divided into 10 companies of 100 men. But as the war progressed, some men would die because of disease. Disease killed more Civil War soldiers than did combat. Others would be wounded and out of action. Some others would be detailed for other duties outside the regiment. And by the middle of the war, by the time that you're dealing with the Battle of Gettysburg, for example, these regiments consisted of anywhere between 300 and 400 soldiers. So they were at less than half strength. And the practice in many states, and it was states that organized these regiments, was rather than to provide replacements for existing regiments, the tendency was to create new regiments. And the reason for doing this was really not a very good reason, because the idea was, from a governor's standpoint, hey, if I create a new regiment, this provides me with an opportunity to appoint as a colonel someone who will then be a political patron, for me, somebody who will support me, somebody that I can reward for past service, and so on. So it's not a terribly rational policy that's going on. You can see that a regiment would cover a length of about 300 yards, say roughly 3 football fields, and then you'd have the main line of battle that you're looking at. This would be two lines of soldiers standing behind one another. They would constitute the main line of battle. And then in the front, you would have what was called a skirmish line. And these were, when during an advance, these guys were designed to, if it wasn't clear where the enemy was located, the skirmishers would be the first to discover where they were. And then on the defense, the skirmish line would be the first to discover an enemy attack if one was forthcoming. Now, this next video takes about 4 minutes, and it describes infantry tactics, and it's done really pretty well. And so let me show you how this one goes.
Civil War soldiers sometimes fought on mountains, sometimes they fought in the woods, they fought along rivers and streams, but most often they fought in places like this, open fields. And if you've seen a Civil War movie, or you've read about the Civil War, or been to a reenactment, you know that soldiers fought in long lines of battle, shoulder to shoulder, and nothing could look stupider to us now. But these soldiers didn't have a death wish. It's not that they weren't smart. They were using the most modern military tactics they had available to them. But the problem is that there were advancements in weaponry that made some of those tactics obsolete. This is not unique. This happens again and again. After every war, you reevaluate and you change those tactics in the following war. The invention I'm talking about more than anything else is the widespread use of rifling. Before the Civil War, guns, handheld guns, fired round bullets, and they could shoot 50 to 100 yards accurately. But suddenly, they're going to have a rifled musket be more common that fires these things, mini balls. This is a Union mini ball, most commonly because it has 3 rings. This one is a Confederate mini ball. It has 2 rings. This isn't absolute, but this is typically how they went. And these things not only spin as they leave the barrel because of grooves in the gun barrel called rifling, but they are also concave inside, which allow the bullet to actually expand and take to the grooves better. And then it spirals as it leaves the gun, and like a spiraled football, these bullets will fly farther and more accurately. And suddenly, you can fire these things 250, 300, 350 yards more accurately. And what that says is that your enemy is going to get off a lot more shots at you when you're crossing that field toward them. Before the Civil War, you could get up pretty close to your enemy, make a final charge, and then overrun the position after they fired a shot or maybe 2. That's not the case in the Civil War. When people tell me that Civil War soldiers had a death wish or weren't that intelligent, I ask them what they would have done. And the most common answer I get is they say, well, I would send 200 guys over here, and then 50 guys over there, and then 300 guys this way, and then 40 more this way, and 100 over in that direction. That doesn't work. All your enemy would do is shoot the first 200, reload, shoot the next 50, reload, shoot the next 100, reload, shoot the next 200, and so on. In the Civil War, it's important to march up to your enemy to deliver a concentrated fire at once. If you march up with 1,000 soldiers, maybe 100 or 200 of them could be killed or wounded in that first volley, but you still have 800 or 900 left to deliver a concentrated fire against your enemy. These are also large armies, huge armies, operating without walkie-talkies or cell phones, so it's very hard to keep them together. Marching shoulder to shoulder, waving flags, blowing bugles are some of the ways where you communicated with these troops in order to keep them moving in the battle. Imagine a large-scale battle and a huge football stadium emptying and trying to control everybody in that, trying to get them to do what you want them to do to move your army around. Very, very difficult. And the frontal movements, these get there first with the most men, bring the greatest amount of firepower as you can against your enemy, was a very important part of the Civil War. So while attacking frontally was still an important part of the Civil War, you had to get at your enemy somehow. One of the ways that you could get at your enemy, which was effective then and is effective now, is of course via flanking. Instead of attacking your enemy straight on, you can get around the end of their line. When you get around the end of their line, they're in big trouble, because if they try to fire in this direction, all their friends are in the way. Whereas if I fire from over here, I can't miss. My guys, if they don't hit him, he'll hit him or him or him or him or him. That is called raking the line or enfilade. And if you are flanked, you have 2 choices: run away or get shot. And despite what some people think, these soldiers did not have a death wish, so they would simply fall back and try to take up a stronger position where they could actually face their enemy. Flanking is a very effective maneuver, and it's one of many used throughout the Civil War to try to get at your enemy, to try to gain an advantage over them.
Okay, before we go on to the next video that I'm going to show you, this one deals with Civil War artillery. A couple of points to be made about this video that I just showed you. First of all, by and large, it's excellent. It's terribly well done. Gary Edelman, who was the narrator, is very able in terms of, he's both written about the American Civil War, he's conducted battlefield tours and staff rides, and so on. But there are a couple of things that I'd like to sort of adjust. One of them is a small thing. The Minié ball was invented by a French guy, Captain Claude Minié, in 1839, not 1847. And this is significant because actually, even during the Mexican War, some American units were equipped with this rifled musket. The second thing is that rifles had been used in previous conflicts. The problem was that an old-time rifle took a long time to load, for reasons that I won't go into. And a major problem was, okay, smoothbore muskets can be loaded, very rapidly. You just push the smooth ball, the circular spherical bullet down the muzzle, and it can be loaded and fired quite quickly. You could get 3 rounds off in a minute's time. It required new technology and this special Minié ball in order to load a muzzle loading rifle or muzzle-loading musket, so as rapidly as you could with a smooth bore round. And so this mini A ball that he was showing is actually a very new technology, and one of that is really very very effective, and it allows rifled muskets to be loaded and fired as rapidly as a smoothbore musket. And so a good well-trained infantryman could fire three times in a minute. Second, the third thing is that although these muskets could indeed fire accurately as far as 200, 300, even 400 yards, that was the maximum effective range of these muskets. Typically, they were still used at much shorter ranges that were really only incrementally longer than smoothbore muskets. A smoothbore musket might be fired at a range of about 80 yards. A Civil War musket was typically fired at a range of about 120 to 160 yards. And that was for two reasons. First of all, Civil War battlefields were often heavily wooded, and so it just wasn't practical to fire any farther than that because you couldn't see the enemy any farther than that. And then the second thing was that Civil War armies were still thinking in terms of shock effect, not firepower. And so the idea was to let an enemy get reasonably close and then fire a volley that would create this shock effect on the advancing unit and cause it to stop, to halt where it was. It's only during the years leading up to the First World War that firepower begins to prevail as sort of the dominant philosophy over going for shock effect. And it's at that point that you see rifles being used according to their maximum range. Okay. The last slide in this presentation shows the organization of a Civil War army. Now, down at the bottom, you'll see the regiments, and these could be anywhere between 300 and 800 men, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes less. And by the way, the artillery equivalent of a regiment was the battery. And this would consist typically of 6 cannon operating together. And battery is just the artillery equivalent of saying excuse me, a Civil War infantry company. So you have the regiments there. Typically, there would be 5 infantry regiments that would go into one brigade. Brigades would consist of anywhere between 1,500 and 3,000 men in real life. At the outset of the war, you'd have 5,000 men because these regiments would be at full strength, 1,000 men each. Then the brigades, in turn, would be organized into divisions, and most Civil War armies had 3 divisions consisting of 3 brigades. This was reasonably standard. And then the divisions would be organized into an army corps. And the number of corps in a Civil War army could vary a good deal. Some armies had only 2 corps for a period of time. Others had 3. Others had more than that. Confederate armies typically had 2 or 3 corps. Union armies had a larger number. And this was actually a problem for the Union armies because a corps, the corps d'armée, as it was called, was invented by Napoleon, and it was intended to be, in effect, a small army that combined infantry and artillery and cavalry, and was intended to be large enough that it could fight against an enemy army for a 24-hour period, giving other corps enough time to come and reinforce the first corps that was being engaged. And so operationally, it made sense. A Union Corps was smaller and was essentially kind of an administrative unit very oftentimes. And so on the march, typically you would have 2 corps under a single general, the senior corps commander of one of the 2, and he would be responsible for it. So it was kind of an awkward arrangement. But if you go to a Civil War battle, it's really the corps Civil War battlefield, it's really the Corps that does the major maneuvering on a Civil War, battlefield. If you're looking at the battle in on a sort of a very large scale, it's the corps that you need to pay attention to. Divisions and brigades, are significant, but then the other unit that you need to pay attention to is the regiment. Most of the markers on a Civil War battlefield commemorate regiments, and in terms of the unit to which a Civil War soldier had the most loyalty, it was to his regiment. Sometimes the brigade was important to him, but less often the division. The corps mattered, to him in terms of a sense of loyalty, and the army did, but mostly it was his regiment, and this his loyalty to the regiment was such that in a battle, if the regiment was about to be overrun, rather than let their regimental colors, their regimental flag, be captured by the enemy, the soldiers would often tear up the regimental flag, and one man would take part of it, and one man would take another part of it, and so forth, so that they could escape individually with their regimental colors, rather than allow those to be defeated, or rather be captured by the enemy.
Now that we have an understanding of the organization and tactics of Civil War infantry, we can now proceed with our demonstration and put what we've learned into practice. Right now, we have deployed a regiment of Union infantry into its standard battle formation. I am in command of this regiment as its colonel. We are currently in front of the defenses of Cold Harbor. However, we will not be making an assault. From this position, we are out of range of Confederate small arms fire, so this gives us the opportunity to make our presentation without too much danger. First, skirmishers are deployed ahead of the main line as a screening force. Your skirmishers are your foot scouts. They will advance first to find and fix the position of the enemy. When your skirmishers are engaged, you know that you have encountered the enemy, and you can then make your next decisions about how to proceed. Remember, your skirmishers are light infantry, and therefore are vulnerable if left unsupported. They should not be left to stand and fight against the enemy. Once you have found the enemy, you must make a decision. Will you advance the infantry to the skirmishers' position and have them fight on that line? Is the terrain unfavorable, or the enemy too close, forcing you to withdraw the skirmishers back to the main line? Do you order the skirmishers to close their ranks and fight as a line infantry unit to support the main line? Or is the enemy force too strong or the situation too unfavorable, forcing a retreat? These are just some of the considerations that you, as a commander, will need to make in the moment, in every battle. The second part of your formation is your main battle line. This is your main body of infantry who will be the ones to slug it out with the enemy face to face. Standard practice is to form them into 3 ranks, but when you have large numbers of troops present, or in cases of poor terrain, 4 or even 5 ranks will be more preferable and more effective. Dense ranks also increase the strength of charges by concentrating troops into a smaller area, instead of spreading them over a wide front, making it ideal for breaking through fortifications and meeting with the enemy in close combat. The third part of your formation is your reserve force. In this case, I have a company of U.S. colored troops acting as my reserves. You may want to have a second reserve company so that you can protect both flanks, but you may not have enough troops in game to ensure that each company has enough strength to be combat effective. That is why I usually only have 1 reserve company. For our purposes, in game, these troops are used to protect the artillery crews and will also support the main line if they need reinforcements. They can also be used as a flanking force if you see an opportunity to conduct such a maneuver. Now that we have, more or less, a full picture of how a Civil War infantry regiment would go into battle, Let us now put these lessons into practice. We will be fighting a true battle against an opponent whose strength will be formidable, but with the deployment of the tactics we have thus far learned, we will be able to defeat them. At this point, I will be ending my narration, and from here on, I will simply allow the battle to unfold and do my job as the regiment's colonel. Take heed of these lessons, and you may yet one day find yourself counted among the great generals of the age. To all the aspiring young officers who have watched this far into the presentation, I wish you good luck and success.